He was in a rush. I'm Ali Patterson and welcome to the Paytech Show. On this episode, we're going to be looking at speed. Real-time payments are everywhere and financial institutions are now having a look at the speed of their cross-border transactions. The real-time payment initiatives currently being implemented in the US are looking to implement this process in the States by giving end users the ability to move their money in a fast and secure way while retaining that comfort and familiarity of their traditional payment methods. In this episode, we're going to be diving into the real-time payment world of the US and how financial institutions tackling the issues of the country's cross-border payment system, showing that more than anything else, delivering cross-border payment services is best when financial institutions are united. So firstly, Bobby Suman heads over to Toronto to join Abdul Nashat, the CEO of Buckzy Payments, a global leader in providing real-time cross-border payments and financial services. Doug McKenzie catches up with Stephen Grainger, the Executive Vice President and Head of Cross-Border Services at Mastercard, one of the biggest financial service companies in the world. And I head over to New York to speak with Elena Whisler, the SVP at the Clearinghouse, a core payments infrastructure builder focused on delivering real-time payments in North America. And with that, let's get on with the show.
My name is Abdul Nashat. I'm the CEO and President at Buckzy Payments.
Abdul, thank you for having me. To give our viewers a background then, what has the payment ecosystem been like across North America?
Oh, it's a long-winded answer for me, but I think it's been exciting. Certainly, there's a lot happening in North America, like everywhere else in the world. I think North America generally has been a little bit slower when it comes to the real-time payments and also from a regulatory framework standpoint for setting up a platform for innovation. When you compare countries like UK or some of the Asian countries, has been a little bit more aggressive, and so there's a little bit of a catching up that's happening and specifically in the US and Canada. And so ecosystem certainly is healthy. Certainly there's a lot of excitement with all the new things that's coming into play in North America specifically, mostly centered around real-time payments and payment modernization, as they call it.
So to give a bit of background, what has the payments ecosystem and network been like over the last few months in North America? Everything's through cheque, isn't it?
It is not all cheque, but it's certainly, cheque is still prominent here. What I think of is that we have 6 main payment types here in the US. So we have cheque, we have cash, we have card, which both credit, debit card, and then we have ACH, wires, and now real-time payments. And so across those 6, you see different ways people move money for the needs that they have. So over the last few years, we in general have seen money move faster, or the requirements for money to move faster from our clients, which are financial institutions. So that's why we launched the Real-Time Payment Network, which we can talk about in a little bit. And that's where we're seeing through all the networks how to move money faster, but also safe and secure for our financial institutions and financial stability here in the US.
So you know what's going to come next. So I do want to talk about real-time payments and around that, but do you think that all of, even wires and checks, do you think that that's something that's going to become utterly redundant and just not used in the same, if something, for example, a completely fast real-time payments network is going to be the norm?
We do talk about it. We actually talk about kind of the ebb and flow of payment types as they move. And what's interesting is during the pandemic, we saw most of the networks that I just talked about shift down, right? So people weren't spending money, they weren't going to stores, they weren't traveling, but ACH transactions, for example, in real time continue to grow. So we saw, like last year here in the US, ACH grew 7-8% Our networks here at the clearinghouse grew 9%, which is exciting to see. While real-time grows, the need across other payment types, generally ACH, wires, and card, will continue to grow because what they serve in their own network it is important for what they need. So consumers need quick at checkout or rewards, right? So that here in the US, rewards is really important to us. And then on wires, you need really that funds availability and this knowledge that a large value transaction is going through with the security and the safety that they need.
I'm looking at these different payment methods within the US. Have you seen any of them grow for payments coming outside of the US inwards? For example, have ACH payments inwards from, say, a bank in the UK? Has that increased in comparison to, say, a wire from the UK coming across to the US?
We've seen a little bit of ACH move. We have a format here in the US within ACH called IAT, and that enables the format, the messages, kind of the rules around it to grow. We haven't seen that grow as much as traditional wires. Wires tend to be kind of the traditional method to move cross-border payments. But ACH is growing, and then there's alternative ways that we're starting to see. You know, you always have closed loop wallets, for example. You have crypto now starting to form, and really borders are kind of being grayed in terms of money movement, which is good, but then we think about also the compliance, the safety and security, because at the end of the day, our clients are the financial institutions which hold the money for the individuals and businesses.
What has changed with regards to cross-border payments in the recent years?
I think the biggest change that's happening now is cross-border moving from 3 to 4 day settlements into next day settlement, and then now moving into real time or near real time payments. And that will continue to be the theme. There's a lot of push towards that. But I think some of the countries like US, Canada, as they kind of get into the real-time, domestic real-time scheme, I think cross-border is one step ahead. They're already trying to, make it real-time. So it's just a matter of embedding into that domestic ecosystem to make it real-time in US cross-border to other parts of the world, as well as into the US, or Canada for that matter. Canada is one step behind than US, I think. But it's getting there.
So, Stephen Grainger, I'm running a business at Mastercard called Cross Border Services, and what we've done over a period of time is we've tried to bring together different assets that allow Mastercard to be able to play in what increasingly becomes termed as this account-to-account space, and being able to use assets to be able to facilitate cross-border payments.
Now, with payments culture and technology around the world just moving at an incredible pace, the innovation that we're seeing is just absolutely amazing. What's really caught your eye over the last couple of years?
Well, I mean, I'll start with maybe not the most exciting thing, but I think the biggest trend that you see in payments is we seem to be in the midst of this, of the use case, right? Everything is about what is the use case, the very specific means by which you can go and service payments.
Yeah.
And when you get to that, when you start to realize that that's kind of the direction that certainly the payments industry is heading in, it gets you to a point of realizing just, why there's so much change, why this pace of change has really picked up, because it allows people to go right down into the depths of how do you service this need very, very specifically, and are there different technologies that can be used to solve that specific need or that problem that you're trying to find an answer to. And so that's the thing that I think has really struck me more than anything else. It is when you see the emergence of, if I say fintechs in particular, nearly every fintech starts out by solving a use case, or trying to make the use case problem, find a better answer for that use case problem. And then we see evolution from that point forward. So that's the big trend.
Yeah.
See, and then when you wrap over that, you can then dig into what's happened with the pandemic and what's happened with the new technology in particular.
Now that we've set the scene, let's dive deeper into cross-border payments. How have cross-border payments themselves changed over the last couple of years too?
Well, as we think about the emergence of, and we've seen the practical realities of, domestic real-time payments emerge, that has created the trend. It's impacted consumers directly, the way that we might move money between ourselves. And of course, that starts to play into what are the expectations you should have or might want to have when you think about trying to move money across borders or across currencies. And so while I think that notion of trying to get to an outcome of cheaper, better, and faster is a laudable one, I think one thing that we've just got to bear in mind is cross-border payments. There is more friction. There is more work to do in moving money across borders. You're effectively going from one domestic scheme and moving money from that one domestic scheme and paying money into another domestic scheme, right? With all the regulation, all the rules that are wrapped around that. And so somebody's got to be accountable for making those things happen. That accountability exists in the exit point from this scheme. It arises on the entry point into this scheme. And it also manifests on the person, the individual, the group, the fintech, the FI, whoever it is that's managing that coordination in the middle, right? And so, until we start to see the removal of some of those frictions, whether that's around financial crime compliance, whether it might be around tax provisioning of tax services, whether it's around FX, if FX is a friction, I think what we've got to bear in mind is that those things are real. Right, and they require some real change that maybe is difficult for technologies to simply solve and answer for.
Yeah.
So, and we're starting to see that with the work that the G20 have focused in on over the last couple of years.
With payments becoming, and I'm going to use this term, global, how have businesses then been able to deliver highly tailored payment services to their business customers?
So for this, I think of the layers of a cross-border payments business. So you have the underlying networks, which is what the clearinghouse is responsible for. You have the financial institutions and what they offer their customers. And then you have the customer experience. So I think of the user experience, the interface that they work with, the notifications that they get, the transparency on the foreign exchange. All of those layers are what makes it unique to that particular business. So at the clearinghouse, we look obviously at the foundation of how money moves between financial institutions as well as the networks in other countries. And so our focus has been on that, and then hopefully working with our partners in fintechs, financial institutions, we look then to the value chain to provide that customer experience that we know businesses really need. So one of the ways that we've done that is we've launched the IXB initiative, which is the Immediate Cross-Border Initiative. So Immediate Cross-Border Payments is an initiative we started here with the EBA clearing as well as SWIFT. And we basically looked at if we connect the real-time payment network here in the US, RTP network, and RT1 in Europe, what happens? What do we change? What do we facilitate? And what do we do? So for example, might be simple, but a simple requirement we have is you have to post the transaction within 5 seconds. That's a rule here in the RTP. And you go to Europe and they have a similar, SLA related to the payments. And so when you bring them together, we still want our businesses and individuals to have that same experience, whether you're domestic, going state to state, or whether you're going US to Europe or Europe to US. And so what we formed that initiative in order to begin to do proof of concepts and pilots to say, do we actually then change the cross-border payment landscape by linking these two networks together? And we think we do. And so we launched a proof of concept, and we now are doing a pilot, which should be live by the end of this year, which focuses on not only the message transformation, the end-to-end flow, but it's also talking about how does money move within those 5 seconds, because that's a requirement of ours. And then, of course, all of the compliance, the data, the regulatory environments that we have to ensure that safety and security that our networks offer.
With payments becoming global, cross-border, yet with strong local customer expectations, how can financial institutions keep up and ensure they're still delivering this effective tailored cross-border payment service?
Very good question, because I think I see that big banks have been investing a lot in keeping up with all the trends. They will continue to do that. But for tier 2, tier 3 banks, I think they would have to, their best bet is to work with a fintech like Buckzy, for example, that can deliver the same level of services and solutions like the big banks are doing. Because I know that big banks are also partnering with fintechs like Buckzy to deliver some of the, I think most innovative solutions out there in cross-border payments.
Payments are all about working together in an ecosystem. With that in mind, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing with Buckzy Payments up in Toronto?
Yeah, no, Buckzy to us is one of the great innovative companies that we see in the cross-border payment space. What we see when we look at cross-border is not only the plumbing, but how it changes the lives of the businesses and individuals. And so Buckzy, from their user interface all the way down to how they process, that is their goal. They're looking at that transparency. They're looking at how that payment is done, how quickly it's done, in order to change the lives of the individuals and the businesses that use them.
That's the thing, the knock-on effect of cross-border payments getting faster, more information attached with them. There's almost a financial inclusion element of it, and not giving everyone a bank account, giving everyone data to give them access to financial services.
Yeah, it's financial growth and wellness, right? So it's bringing it into the financial system where the money really belongs, and then to grow it from there. So you're growing people and businesses' lives through transparency and making the money move much faster to be accessed for other things that they need.
What does the introduction of FedNow mean for the payments ecosystem?
Yeah, so FedNow is a similar initiative. This is really centered around making payments real-time, 24/7, 365 days available, primarily for consumers and businesses, and really focused on domestic enablement of bill payments, B2B payments. There's a lot of use cases that can take advantage of real time. So FedNow is the government's push. When you it's like a catch up when you compare other countries that's got, already proven that real time is here to stay. So I think it's a US government push, because I think they kind of left it too long for the banks to run using the clearinghouse, but it hasn't really made any progress. So I think that's why Fed, I believe, is trying to push FedNow, and that is putting the power on consumers rather than a bank, whether they had, use this in an application or not. It kind of drives the adoption of the solution on the RTP's case. But FedNow is, I feel like it'll be highly successful.
Cross-border payments, especially now that they're real-time, rely on partnerships. So how does Mastercard look at partnering, and how are you looking to continue those partnerships and keep up with those incredible customer demands?
Yeah, so we work with banks and FIs and MBFIs and fintechs at the front end of our story and at the back end of our story as well, to be able to enable the experience. And I think that's what we're really trying to foster is how do you transform the experience from the status quo into something that actually meets the needs of the customers that are trying to use want to use the product. And so, as coming back to what I said earlier, cross-border payments is all about this. It's all logistics, if you like. It is how do you move money out of this one domestic market? How do you move it into another domestic market? How do you make sure you remain regulatory compliant along the way? How do you not how do you not layer on all that burden to the customer who's at the end of the or at the beginning of the cycle? So we're working with organizations to help speed up the delivery of those payments to provide more certainty. Now, when I think about cross-border payments, I think that what actually are the problems that you really need to try to solve for. Yes, it's great to think about, cheaper, better, faster. But I think that ultimately in this space, what you really need is to be able to provide certainty and predictability. Certainty in terms of what's actually going to happen to my payments, right? Is it going to move in real time? Is it going to move today? Is it going to move tomorrow? If I know that, then actually you could argue, do I need those things to be real time? Most of the challenge is just the not knowing.
Yeah.
You asked the question earlier, what's the biggest pain point? I think for most people, it's the lack of predictability, and it's the lack of certainty in terms of what's going to happen to my payment. If I'm an SME and I've invoiced somebody to a buyer, and I'm running on really tight margins and really tight cash flow, I want to know that the goods that I've already given away, the money is going to come for it. The invoice is going to get paid in a timely manner. And I'm expecting that the funds to hit my account at a certain point in time. That's not unrealistic. That's not unfair. But quite often, funds don't move with the same speed and transparency that you get used to when you make that payment domestically. And I think that's what creates a lot of the challenge. I think the other thing is being clear in terms of what actually is going to land in that account. Right? If I've invoiced you, Doug, for £12,000, I don't want you to deliver 11,980, right? I want £12,000.
Yeah.
That's the crux of it. That's what would happen here if you were to move domestic payment. And I think that's the very realistic outcome and expectation. It's not a difficult one. It's a very simple base expectation that anybody who interacts into this ecosystem expects.
So cross-border payments are all about connections. How can the likes of Mastercard, the clearinghouse, Buckzy, utilize this in order to work with organizations such as SWIFT and the EBA to deliver cross-border payment solutions?
So we know that there's many players, and we all know that they play their own space in how they move money. And so when we work with all of those organizations, we look to them to help us form what makes sense for businesses and consumers at the end of the day, and for our financial institutions that are our clients. So when we work with SWIFT, we focus on a lot of messaging and the global network that SWIFT provides. When we look at EBA clearing, we look very similar to our financial institution partners in how they need to move money for their businesses and also for their correspondent banking business, which is incredibly important for them. So, and then we look at other players, and I mentioned earlier about crypto, but also Mastercard, also the Visa networks. All those networks kind of form together to create an end-to-end ecosystem and choice, right? So at the end of the day, businesses need choice. They need to know what those networks provide them in terms of accountability, but confirmation of payment, transparency of payment, and the foreign exchange related to that.
What will having real-time payments mean for banks' customers moving forward, particularly real-time payments from a cross-border perspective? And what will the knock-on effect be for things such as financial inclusion for the underbanked now that there's a lot more data on them?
So can you imagine where we move money 24/7, 365 for businesses? So businesses can send or receive money 24/7, 365. They don't need to think of cash flow forecasting in some areas. They can really, at the time that they need to send and receive their instructions and the money related to that. So I think of the consequences today of reconciliation and invoices. So your accounts payables, your accounts receivable systems, they're all doing that after the fact. And so if you can shorten those cycles and do it in the moment that an invoice needs to get paid and close that invoice, that solves a lot of problems that businesses have today.
Cross-border payments, I think about it as being connections. How are organizations like Buckzy using this infrastructure to connect and enable other industry leaders like the EBA or SWIFT to also deliver a robust customer or cross-border experience?
In the old days, when you kind of think about it, SWIFT was the center of, the network for cross-border. And it still has a, place in the ecosystem. But I think that is changing. It has shifted for many reasons, because I think they try to hold on to the same models, technology, and I think with the change of technology and innovation, there's so many other options that now that came into the market. So I think that organizations like SWIFT will have to look at other models, like partnering with fintechs and other ecosystems to make themselves valuable or sustain themselves in this, but SWIFT has its own position, and they still work very well with the banks, and especially for large value payments, it's still a relevant network, right? So, but I think the model is hard for them to change, and that's also their disadvantage.
So I've got to ask, what is the future of cross-border payments, and what are you doing at Mastercard to stay right at the heart of that?
It's really interesting. Like pre-pandemic, I was in China, and the local team took me to this place, and they're like, "Hey, look, you can go and pay for, your smoothie by just showing your face, right? Facial recognition using biometrics." That was in 2019, right? And here today we talk about 2022, and in our, if you ask that question, it's relevant to where you're sitting today, right? What's acceptable in our culture, in our cultures, in the way that what technology will we allow to play more important roles. We're starting to see more acceptance of things like biometrics playing a role in the payment process, and so I think we'll see more of that. Right, no doubt, and actually, biometrics can help layer in more security into the process. And security is a critical factor certainly in terms of, if you think about the world's getting faster, how do you actually layer in the right layers of security to ensure that it's you that's sending the payment and it's me that's going to receive that payment? So I think we'll see that. I think you can't have this conversation without touching on, to some greater or lesser extent, the utilization of tokens. Digital currencies, what role will they play? How will they play a role? They may not necessarily play a role in the way that many people expect. It's still not lost on me that today most people still hold their primary store of wealth with a bricks and mortar organization that looks like a bank. But they're very happy to move some chunks of money into a wallet to experience and experiment with tokens, to engage in new payment experiences. And so, inevitably, tokens will play much more of a role in the way we think about payments going forward. It's just that those tokens, I think they will start to evolve to become much more like a currency. And if it behaves more like a currency, you can take out some of the volatility that you see today in a token, in some of the coins and some of the tokens that exist, and that gives you more assurity again in terms of what you're actually paying for. Nobody wants today to pay £2.50 for a flat white and tomorrow be paying £10 for a flat white because the thing that you're paying with is significantly changed in value. Right? I think that means that I think we'll see more evolution in that space.
What will having a real-time cross-border payment experience mean for the bank's business customers going forward?
That's changing drastically, because when you kind of think about, you can make a payment 24/7 and still get the same experience of instant settlements in another country across the globe. regardless of if the bank is open there or not, it makes a huge difference. It pretty much becomes like as if you are texting somebody and the message is delivered regardless of the time zones or whether it's a holiday. That's where it's going, right? So I think that experience will become a staple. I mean, it's just becomes a norm after some time, right? I think you send a text and you expect to get there in a matter of seconds. So same will be for payments, and I think companies like Buckzy providing an infrastructure is to enable financial institutions to deliver any type of use cases, because there's tons of opportunities in cross-border payments, like a charity payment or a gift payment, or an international tuition payment. So banks can innovate any type of use cases. So what has been holding them back is a platform and infrastructure that can deliver that quickly in a short amount of time with less cost. And that's what Buckzy has built, is an infrastructure to enable that to happen.
Well, that's all we've got time for in today's episode of the Paytech Show. You can catch the rest of our episodes and much more over at ffnews.com and of course on our YouTube and LinkedIn channels. Thank you so much to all our viewers at home. I've been Ali Patterson with Douglas McKenzie and Bobby Suman, and I will see you next time.